Phaeton and Helios, or Daedalus and Icarus, are ancient depictions of cataclysmic events in our prehistory that are still affecting us today, not only geologically but also geopolitically. Both depictions are of asteroids that struck Earth about 15,000 years ago that melted glaciers and sank Atlantis beneath the rising oceans, something we are about to experience again as oceans continue rising. Daedalus Helios struck Greenland like a starburst, leaving behind a 31-kilometer wide crater under a 5-kilometer thick glacier, while Icarus Phaeton struck the Great Lakes after being struck by a bolt of lightning, before striking Laurentide ice sheet and forming Carolina Bay's geologic formations. The Celtic double disk and Z rod signify these events with two asteroids and a bolt of lightning. This Carantes sealing stone was placed by an ancient Egyptian priestess, Ankhesenpeten, or Ankhesenamun, prior to Stonehenge, placed in Ireland, the Emerald Isle. You can see the atomic force being depicted by the two heavenly bodies. You can see they knew about the solar system or the moon always looking at us, watching Icarus Phaeton pass beneath, striking again in Mauritania, leaving behind the Eye of Sahara. Daedalus Helios picked up a stray asteroid along its elliptical orbit, came to be named as his son Icarus Phaeton, which led to the eventual impact with Earth. This last ice age cycle is the reason we are now living in the age of Aquarius. The nearby orbit used to avert a pole reversal every 26,000 years with the orbit in close proximity. About 15,000 years ago, Earth was mostly covered in glaciers and ice sheets. Even during the summer season, most of the land was still covered by ice sheets. At the dawn of time or prehistory, there is evidence reminding us of a cataclysm that happened about 15,000 years ago. The main impact of Icarus Phaeton struck the Laurentide ice sheet and ejected glacial debris that formed the Carolina Bay's geologic formations and caused the Missoula floods. The fractured asteroid ricocheted across the Atlantic, striking again in Mauritania before landing in the river Jordanus, beside Ethiopia, where it boiled the blood of the Ethiopians from the steam. The impact created the Niagara Escarpment, and the glacial debris formed elliptical impact craters before it melted away. The eastern seaboard is peppered with these Carolina bays and go across the continent over to Washington state along the edge of the Laurentide ice sheet. The rising oceans flooded the lands, leaving behind transverse dunes not only in Sahara from hydraulic surges of the Mediterranean when it flooded, but also in Montana from the Missoula floods. Eye of Sahara was a secondary impact site of Phaeton after it ricocheted across the Atlantic, symbolized by the Ricat structure. These impacts ended the Pleistocene epoch, ending the Ice Age cycles. After the Chicxulub impact, the dinosaurs lasted another 9 million years. How long will we last in this Holocene epoch, a mammal extinction level event? The evidence remains of Daedalus starburst discovered recently of a 31-kilometer wide crater beneath a 5-kilometer thick Hiawatha Glacier. These events are recorded by the Milankovitch cycles. The first impact of Daedalus Helios in Greenland was a starburst that triggered an immediate melt that sank Atlantis beneath the sea in consequence of an extraordinary earthquake inundation, and suddenly disappeared, becoming sea. Astrologers maintain that an astrological age is a product of the Earth's slow precessional rotation and lasts about 2,000 years on average, suggesting this was the orbit of Daedalus' rotating orbit between Earth, Mars, and Jupiter for hundreds of thousands of years. This is known as the astrological zodiac, with one great year lasting about 26,000 years and 13 orbits depicted by the original 13 zodiac signs every 2,000 years. The evidence is abundant for anybody to see for themselves. Phaeton having won a favor by his father Helios, when the day came, the fierce horses that drew the chariot felt that it was empty because of the lack of the sun god's weight, and went out of control. Terrified, Phaeton dropped the reins, and the horses veered from their course, scorching the earth, burning the vegetation and boiling the blood of the Ethiopians, bringing it to the surface of their skin, and so turning it black, changing much of Africa into a desert, drying up rivers and lakes, and shrinking the sea. Earth cried out to Jupiter, who was forced to intervene by striking Phaeton Icarus with a lightning bolt. Like a falling star, Phaeton plunged blazing into the river Eridanus, or in Red Sea. If you swap the U for an E, you have an anagram of AEIOU with Eridanus and in Red Sea. The heat was so intense it melted sand of the Sahara, turning it into glass, covering great swaths of land. Daedalus, Helios, was a skillful architect and craftsman. Seen as a symbol of wisdom, knowledge, and power, he is the father of Icarus and the uncle of Perdiz. Among his most famous creations are the wooden cow for Pasiphae, the labyrinth for King Minos of Crete, which imprisoned the Minotaur, and wings that he and his son Icarus used to attempt to escape Crete. It was during this escape that Icarus did not heed his father's warnings and flew too close to the sun. The wax holding his wings together melted, and Icarus fell to his death. Could this be the labyrinth for King Minos of Crete by an architect named Daedalus? There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this was the form of the myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which occurs after long intervals. As a result, he drives the chariot too close to the earth, burning it, and too far from it, freezing it. This would be the cause of melt pulses 1b and 1a. Missoula floods with the impact, ending the Pleistocene epoch, or traditional ice age cycles. The secondary impacts of fate and Icarus in north of Africa are what caused the younger dry sediment layers, as the initial glacial impacts did not eject as much dust as it did glacial debris. This is the event where it is described that Phaeton moved beneath the moon. Due to hydraulic surging, when the Mediterranean flooded after the English Channel formed, the north of Africa was left barren as the salt contaminated the soil. It is also likely what caused the erosion on the Sphinx, and is why the casing stone remains on the top of one of the pyramids. It was 10,000 years ago when the English Channel formed, so some time not long after that is when the Mediterranean flooded. For the ocean there at that time was navigable, for in front of the mouth, which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surround it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now in this island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, of great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also in parts of the continent. According to Critias, the Hellenic deities of old divided the land so that each deity might have their own lot. Poseidon was appropriately and to his liking bequeathed the island of Atlantis. The island was larger than ancient Libya and Asia Minor combined, but it was later sunk by an earthquake and became an impassable mud shoal, inhibiting travel to any part of the ocean. Plato asserted that the Egyptians described Atlantis as an island consisting mostly of mountains, in the northern portions and along the shore. At a time 15,000 years ago when oceans were over 100 meters lower than they are today, and encompassing a great plain in an oblong shape in the south. The island extended in one direction 3,000 stadia, or about 555 kilometers or 345 miles. The city was circular, about 23.5 kilometers, or 15 miles in diameter. Through the middle ran a canal connecting the sea with the great rectangular irrigate plain on the far side. Across the inland it was about 2,000 stadia, or 370 kilometers or 230 miles. 50 stadia, about 9 kilometers or 6 miles from the coast. 15,000 years ago, there was a mountain, low on all sides, broken off all round about, marked by the continental ridges. And alongside the bridges, carved tunnels into the rings of rocks so that ships could pass into the city around the mountain. They carved docks from the rock walls of the moats. Every passage to the city was guarded by gates and towers, and a wall surrounded each ring of the city. The walls were constructed of red, white, and black rock quarried from the moats and covered in brass, tin, and precious metal or talcum, respectively. The descendants of these kings built the city of Atlantis. It was circular, about 24 kilometers or 15 miles in diameter. The central island itself was 5 stades in diameter, about 0.9 kilometers or 0.57 miles. Poseidon carved the mountain where his love dwelt into a palace and enclosed it with 3 circular moats of increasing width, varying from 1 to 3 stadia and separated by rings of land proportional in size. The Atlanteans then built bridges northward from the mountain, making a route to the rest of the island. They dug a great canal to the sea and alongside the bridges carved tunnels into the rings of rock so that ships could pass into the city around the mountain. They carved docks from the rock walls of the moats. That an island of such nature and size once existed is evident from what is said by certain authors who investigated the things around the outer sea. For according to them, there were 7 islands in that sea in their time, sacred to Persephone, and also 3 others of enormous size, one of which was sacred to Hades, Iceland, and another to Ammon, Ireland, and another one between them to Poseidon, the extent of which was 1,000 stadia, 200 kilometers. And the inhabitants of it, they add, preserved the remembrance of their ancestors of the immeasurably large island of Atlantis, which had really existed there, and which for many ages had reigned over all islands in the Atlantic Sea, and which itself had likewise been sacred to Poseidon. Now these things Marcellus has written in his Ethiopica. Atlantean survivors moved inland through Europe into Eurasia, leaving monolith in their wake as they became Neolithic. The Atlanteans asked for sanctuary from those who inhabited what is now the Mediterranean, but were refused. So they built Göbekli like Tepe and Jericho at the crossroads into Asia and India. They rebuilt the Earth calendar by Kronos of Atlantis, bringing agriculture to the region as we evolved into Neolithic as a new species across Mesopotamia. As oceans rose, the English Channel formed, submerging a boat-building platform considered the oldest known boatyard in the world, discovered near Boldmore Cliff off the Isle of Wight, discovered in the English Channel in 1999. The newly discovered platform is the most cohesive wooden Stone Age late Mesolithic structure ever found in the UK, dating to 8400 BC. During the Bronze Age, goods flowed east and west. Advancement still flows from the shores of the Atlantic, from the Stone Age to the Iron Age to the Space Age. When Mediterranean began flooding and after refusing sanctuary to Atlanteans, those who dwelt within the Mediterranean were now forced to ask for sanctuary from the Atlantean survivors to whom they had refused. They likely assumed their asylum would be met with refusal, leading them to attack Jericho in Jordan, Palestine. If they had followed the Balfour Declaration, they may have found their promised land, but they didn't. Had they been shepherds and stewards to Palestine and its people, they could have found their promised land, even after their multiple failed attempts since Jericho. Humanity is always willing. They must learn to walk the path of peace, not the path of war. This is the only path that leads to the land that is promised, to replace their lost homeland after the Mediterranean flooded. Even despite having first refused sanctuary to Atlanteans and then their attack on Jericho, the surviving Atlanteans still left hope to the innocent after Jericho to eventually find their promised land. We entered the age of Aquarius in 2012 and it was what the Olmec Mayan calendars were calculating. The age of Aquarius has been sped up by human activity over the past few hundred years as we enter the post-industrial climate crisis.